Today, I have the pleasure of announcing our first speaker. I first heard him speak at DevOpsDays in Silicon Valley on software-defined networks. He's an alum of Canonical and Strateus, Chef, Socketplane, Docker, and numerous other technology companies. He's worked in IT for 35 years. He's authored 6 IBM Red Books on enterprise systems management, and he was the founder and chief architect at Chainbridge Systems. Currently, he's the VP of DevOps at SJ Technologies in Atlanta, Georgia. Please join me in welcoming John Willis.
So, here's the thing. When you get to be my age, you round down. So 35 years. So when you're young, you like round up, right? Like, I got 20, I got 10 years, and you really only have 8, okay? So it's actually around 38 years. I'll go with this. The divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity. So have a little fun. Hopefully I scare the hell out of you. And we could also call this Introduction to DevSecOps. I am John Willis. The gateway to contact me is Bachkaloop. It's Twitter or Gmail, whatever. It's just the one that, no matter where I go, that one will always be there. So, and I like to engage too. So, like Twitter is the place, right? So if you say, hey, your presentation was a bunch of crap, that's the place to go. So. He covered some of my stuff. I've been doing stuff for a long, long time. In fact, this is only really the last 10 years. I'm going to bore you. I did mainframes. I did all sorts of crazy stuff. I was one of the original cloud evangelists for Canonical, so that was kind of fun. And I was the 9th person at Chef, kind of built most of the customer-facing business there. Actually enabled me. Adam Jacob gave me a credit card. He was the founder, and said, go to all the DevOps conferences. So early, 2009, 2010. That's what I did. And then I did a startup that was sold to Dell, which that cloud management. And probably the kind of the craziest or maybe funnest thing I've ever done is that Socketplane thing, which was a 3-month-old company I sold to Docker and spent almost 3 years at Docker. And this ludicrous idea of adding software-defined networking to Docker. And today I'm actually director of DevOps and digital transformation practices, so it's not really a siloed DevOps. I'm doing a lot of work with CIOs, and less technology, more about meta skills. And then on the right, a lot of cool stuff, including DevOps Handbook, some smaller books that we work with. Gene Kim, who wrote the Phoenix Project, he has a group of people that he works with, part of DevOps Enterprise Summit. Every year we all go to Portland, about 40 or 50 of us, and we try to work on the hardest problems in DevOps. If you go to IT Revolution Press, they now are actually getting really good at publishing, so there's probably about 15 really good books out there. Dear Auditor was one that was created this year, so some really good stuff. I worked on a bunch, but Mythbusters was a cool one. And then the only other thing, the shameless plug here, this is something I did with Gene about a year ago now. It's probably been getting close to a year. It was an audio-only book, and it's only for geeks. It's about the convergent history of all the things like lean and safety and resilience and learning organization. And so 1 Audible credit. Okay, that's it. Just 1 Audible credit. I mean, just like an afterthought next time you bring up Audible. Bang, selected. All right, well. And then, we're actually working on, it should be out maybe the beginning of next year, the DevSecOps handbook with Shannon Leitz. And I'll be talking a little bit about Shannon here in the presentation. All right, so let's get started. The felonious nature of cybersecurity. So I said that this presentation is the divine and felonious nature. I'll end with the divine, if there is such a thing. But the felonious nature of cybersecurity is pretty obvious, or should be pretty obvious. If it's not, it will be, hopefully, in the next 5 or 6 slides. Mark Andreessen, if you don't know him, he just made 30 cents on a dollar on a $7 billion acquisition. He was one of the original investors in GitHub. Andreessen Horowitz, he had this kind of profound statement. It was quite a while back in a Wired magazine. He said that software is eating the world. And I don't I can't imagine anybody really disagrees with that, or certainly I would be very surprised if anybody in this room disagreed with that. But here's the thing, that when you start talking to deep cyber people, and I'm really becoming more of a student of what is the effect of cyber in this new world. It's really the whole reason that socket plane network thing happened. I got really curious about why aren't we DevOpsing networking? And that wound up getting me to a software company where we kind of tried to do some of that. So for almost 2 years now, I've been really becoming a student of, I've been a student of DevOps my whole career. Like I said, I tell people I'm not the smartest person in DevOps, but I'll challenge anybody to say they're a more ingrained or into the student or this kind of study of DevOps. And so now I've been doing that with cyber or software security, whatever you want to call it. And so what you hear then is from the people who are like, okay, I love this DevOps thing, and how do we get involved? But here, let me tell you what I'm scared about, which is I agree software is eating the world, but it's also infecting the world. And there's the paradox. So there's a big old fat paradox here, right? And I'll dive a little deeper into that. Like the train has left the station. There's no turning back. I mean, here's the numbers. So if you haven't, an interesting report, Sonatype is here. So I work with them. They're good blokes, if you will. But some of the things they've been doing, I think, which is phenomenal. So they pretty much own Maven Central. So they pretty much see most of the world's traffic for Java. And so for now, 3 years now, they've been writing something called the Supply Chain Report. And basically, it's just incredible data. Again, some of it's non-Java, but like the meat of what their report talks about is what they do know about Java, because again, they have the insight. But if you look at the latest report, and I apologize if it still isn't out yet, I got an early copy of it, so I didn't even check to see. But if it's already out, then I'm probably safe. But it should be out any day now if it isn't. But check with the booth. Look at that, 10 years of exponential growth in open source. So this is not a negative open source. Again, there's no turning back on open source. I mean, if you're using Amazon, there's a ton of open source under that, right? Google built on open source. Sort that they created and open source that they use, right? So the growth of open source has gotten us to the place. So I would say that my 15-year-old son, he's not a high Q, he's not a genius, he's really just an average, he's not dumb. Every year I get him on a project. He speaks in LA at this Scale conference. It's a technology for kids thing. And this year his project is going to be using TensorFlow and trying to recognize facial recognition so we can unlock the door. Now, 5 years ago, very few people in this room could have even attempted that. You probably would have had to be at some very special, place. But the open source has gotten us to things like TensorFlow and deep learning, TensorFlow is a deep learning tool. It's all open source. The reason Google Cloud and Amazon Cloud, right? It's all built on open source. You all know this, right? So that's the paradox, right? We can't turn back. But the problem is that this abstraction, absurd abstraction that gives us this ability to do incredible commerce, startups, everything, there is a cost. And I think the moral of the story is that we'll have to think more about hygiene. It isn't that we get rid of open source, or oh my God, we can do this, but it is plagued with dependencies, and I'll go through it that are dangerous. These are just some of the breaches that, the big name breaches. I think that basically most of the reports hover around about 8 million per breach, but mileage definitely varies. In fact, I think it's the IBM 2018 report says that a million record breach is about 40 million. 50 million would therefore be 350 million. And you can see we go from 4 billion. And then there's the, the Target breach. That one happened around, the year that they were really wanted to take on e-commerce against Amazon. There's the kind of lost opportunity cost that you can't even measure, right? So these things cost a lot, and then I work with so many clients, and it's like, well, it hasn't happened to us. All right, sure. If you don't believe what's going on, this is kind of, I gave this presentation at Swamp Up, which is JFrog. I did the keynote JFrog conference. So this is the week before Swamp Up. I went to what's called module counts, and 1.5 million Java modules per week. But here's the one that should scare the hell out of you. Basically, 5 million node modules per week are being downloaded. 5 million node modules per week. And again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I'm going to spend no time on. But if you want to actually read some really interesting things about what's going on in node code, right, it will scare the hell out of you. The 8%. Oh, here's the thing, right? And the 2018, some of this comes from the software supply chain from Sonatype. It's actually now 10%. So you got this like, what is it? 83 billion modules being downloaded, and we know that 10% are vulnerable. That's bad math, right? This one's interesting. Like this tells me that the problem is so pervasive that one of the higher vulnerability attack vectors today is these RCEs. Basically, where they find ability to escape in and run code, right? So the Equifax was basically an old legacy HTML tag in a module, HTML parsing module, something called struts2, and then the actual code was in this module called Jakarta. And it was just some of it was legacy, and you could literally put an escape pound and actually run a command. So you come in, just send in your HTML code and run a command on, and actually I think I have the code example a little bit, and if that machine was authorized, bang, you're dead. But like this was a vulnerability that came out, I don't know, about 6 months ago, maybe a little longer. It's in every Red Hat DNS client, every distribution, Fedora, Red Hat, Enterprise. And anybody notice what the change is? Right? It's adding a -R. And the -R so you can't escape. Now this wasn't the National Institute of Standard Technology manages vulnerability risk scores, and this was not as high. Not really sure why, but the point is, like, it's not only the code that we need to be. That's where when I do this presentation, usually I'm funny and everybody's laughing, and now I'm like depressing everybody. But hey, it's like, this is not me. I'm actually a funny guy. It's just not the code. There's a meta message here too that I'll talk near the end. It's the configuration that we're building. I mean, this is a script, but like, I mean, I'm trying to get some of the people I've met that are real white hat hackers to just let's have a feast on all the YAML code in Kubernetes. Let's see where that goes. I'm trying to get the guy, Chris Roberts is the guy who actually hacked into the entertainment center on a flying plane and made the plane do the climb instruction. I'd like to get that guy to look at like a bunch of the Helm charts and the Kubernetes code to see like what we can get out of that. I'm pretty certain it'll be pretty scary. Again, no turning back. I love Kubernetes. I love what's going on. Next generation infrastructure. If you're really boring like me, you do your day job, you hang out with your kids. I can't help my kids with math anymore. Like, it's too complicated for me. But you do somehow. I try to help with their homework. My kids are older, and Georgia Tech is my other son, so not even going to attempt to try to help with math. But then after that all happens, then you go in and you actually go in and try to find Shodan to see if you have any of your friends running exposed Jenkins servers. So here's the thing. Friends don't let friends run default installed Jenkins. Now, the Cloud BSP will come and beat me up and yell, and I'm sorry, it was just sort of a joke, but it used to be that way, and now their default is locked down. But the point is, there are a lot of test systems out there, and like you literally scroll through some of these things, and you see, oh, I know that. That's a friend of mine's startup. Oh my God, they've got an open, older version of Jenkins sitting out there. Like, maybe I'll give them maybe I'll ping them. This is, it's funny, Verizon has this really good DBIR report every year, and this was actually going back to 2015, and I thought, should I take this out of my presentation? But actually in their 18 report, they actually still refer to this. So it's definitely valid, which is in 2015, when they were doing their survey, they found that, 97% of all exploits were known to 10 known vulnerabilities. Right? So the problem is staring everybody's face. I think when I first read this report, there was something on 60 Minutes with some genius person that does algorithmic cyber forensic. And I'm like, well, I mean, 97% of all exploits were known. And not only that, it's worse than that, which they don't say, is 8 of them were 10 years old. So you don't have to go to MIT or University of Michigan to become this cyber. I mean, you could, and you might help DoD, but probably if you just want to get some big brand name company, if you're going to do that, which most people wouldn't here, it's a lot easier than that. And so if you're super, super boring, you go ahead and actually read SEC and filings or SEC filings are pretty cool. Anybody familiar with the Knight Capital story? Right? One person, right? It's a little sidebar here, but it was a high-frequency trading company, number 2 on the NYSE, and basically a deployment that was supposed to go to 8 servers. So this isn't security, but if you really want to read a fascinating postmortem, the SEC postmortem on it, 8 servers. The person manually installed 7, but not the 8th. There was a legacy trading system on the 8th. They lost $400 million in 45 minutes and were out of business in 24 hours. Fascinating SEC postmortem. The Equifax actually has a reasonable one that gives you an accurate timeline. That's why I like it, which is the person who was in charge, when he found out about the Equifax breach before it had been public, he dumped all his stock. So he's going to jail. And so this is the complaint against him. So let's talk about the Equifax. The Equifax breach is kind of interesting. Here's the thing. It could have been anybody. They got unlucky. I think a year after the Equifax breach, there's, from the Sonatype data, maybe Essential, there's at least 40,000 companies, 40,000 organizations still running that vulnerable code. So they just got unlucky, all right? And so this isn't I'm smarter than Equifax, or they should have done this, or they should have done that. But the data gives us some insight. So it was called Struts 2. That was the vulnerability. It was a 10 on a 10 scale, right? And if Spinal Tap was there, they would have made it 11. Somebody laughed. One person laughed. I owe you a beer. This was bad. This was Homeland Security trying to speed dial people. And so it was discovered, it was discovered on March 6th, but maybe you should have known it by the 9th. And then CVE, which is how the government, National Standard Technology, creates. But even if you were on the spot, and this is a punch on Oracle, although I do like to punch Oracle periodically, they would have in April, just overlaid that vulnerability in their quarterly patches. But here's the thing about Equifax. They really didn't, and then sooner or later they got the patch, but this was just rolling patch hygiene. They didn't actually, and they didn't even know, they started seeing some anomalies. And this is a symptom of what kind of company are you? If DevOps has taught us anything, is that we have to own our own SLAs. We have to own our stuff. We don't let the vendors tell us how we do our business. We invite the vendors in to help solve our problems. We define our problems, right? So this is an example of a company that wasn't acting that way, because the first thing it is tried to find some really highfalutin analytics cyber company to come and investigate. And it was a known vulnerability that pretty much anybody who was paying attention 3 or 4 months earlier would have known about. You had the lawsuit, you have the bad hygiene of the person who dumps his stock. If you read the SEC complaint. It's just kind of fascinating in terms of how a chain of events. I have no idea. I didn't go in. I haven't investigated. Of course, nobody there is going to talk about it who's not under NDA. But I believe that it probably was a signal-to-noise ratio problem. And again, that is, we're going to get into what I believe DevSecOps is, but this could have been a state where security always thinks their stuff is the most important, or they're always sending us a gazillion alerts about everything, and maybe it just got buried somewhere and never bubbled up. Because I do know a company, Fannie Mae, Citra Longo, who is fascinating at Fannie Mae. She was a Java programmer that was given the opportunity to run an AppSec group with no AppSec background. And this is when you have everything looks like a nail problem. I mean, a Java programmer says, oh, well, how do I solve AppSec? The first thing she does is she tries to build a pipeline that looks like something a Java programmer would understand and know and do all that. And it's a fascinating story. You can Google her, and she's got some at RSA. She gave a presentation at RSA early this year. But this is what happened there. They discovered it on 3.9. On 3.9, there was a war room with the executive team and all of AppSec. And Citra, and everybody knew, but Citra certainly and her CISO said, this is really, really, really bad. And the other thing that I like about this story is Fannie Mae, and I've been there a few times, I've talked to the executives, they all seem to have this consistent message that we are America's most valued housing partner. We're the people who put people in houses. That's what I call true north, like a company that actually kind of, like on their website says something, but it seems like the people who do the work actually say the same thing. And so Citra raised the, what would happen if 150 million of loan applications were out in the wild because we didn't address this as a night now, we can't go to bed problem. That line would be full of shit. And so what they did is they actually shut down the production loan application, which is not an easy thing to do, going into a weekend for loans. She didn't wait the next day to call IBM or call, all the vendors that are the cyber experts to figure out what they would tell her to do. She just put a POC together with her team, basically ran something similar to a script like that she could just curl, hit every URL, internal, external, and the ones that broke through basically was read Etsy password. And the ones that broke through were the punch list for the ones that they were going to remediate. And within a day and a half, they had full remediation. Then they brought the loan system up. They had zero impact of that breach. So it comes to the question of how do you, we talk about DevOps, we talk about culture, right? And we talk about technology, right? That's where the two meet really well. It's one thing to have all this great automation. Another thing is get the CEO to say, okay, yep, you're right. I trust you. We're going to shut down the production loan application. There was another one in spring, but I don't know, about 6 months later, and I did Pivotal. My best friends are over at Pivotal. Andrew Schaefer is one of I love the guy. Michael Cote. I just go on and list all the people I love over at Pivotal. So this isn't a punch Pivotal, but it was the same problem. It wasn't Struts 2, but it was an RCE. It was a, kind of command and execution injection, and it was in spring. That's big game hunting, right? And from the time it was published to the time it was corrected, there was a pretty large delta. So it's kind of turtles all the way down, right? And here's if you didn't get the point yet, we're all doing a shitty job, right? So if you're looking for one actor, you're in the wrong, you're in the wrong space, but you're in the wrong business. And here's the supply chain report. Still 12 months later, the numbers of downloads of that already known on CNN, you had to be Rip Van Winkle to miss this one, and people are still using it, the Struts 2, right? So there was another one more recently. It was another RCE. They're just going to come. They're just going to come. And again, I think the configuration things are going to make it worse. All right, so kind of wrap it up for this portion is the world has changed. the felonious nature, one of the primary things what I would say is the felonious nature of how we think about cyber is we've been institutionalized in thinking that if we protect the perimeter, or even more specifically, if we pay $10 million a year to some other person to protect the perimeter, we're safe, right? And the truth of the matter is the really bad people don't give a shit about the perimeter. They sneak in your building, they tailgate, they get in. So that whole systemic way of thinking about perimeter protection, and I pay $10 million to vendor X, Y, and Z, therefore I'm safe, checkbox. Security compliance. One of my greatest fun now is this, to tell CIOs they have security and compliance theater. Drop the mic. Go ahead, tell me where I'm wrong. And then we start with the cab, right? But so the mind has to be that we have to protect the inner perimeter. And then the truth is, the really bad people, it's the ones that you think. So one of the things I ask people is, do you have a policy on critical and high vulnerabilities? And then I know where the conversation is going based on your answer. If you say yes, then we talk about, like, what is it? Is it 30 days, 60 day, 90 day? Do you have production versus, do you have critical systems? And then also, what's the exception processing? And can you tell me right now how many you have? Can you tell me how many are 2x, 3x exceptions? But the other thing I ask is, do you have the same policy for production and non-production, or DMZ versus, right? And they'll say, oh, of course we have a different one. I'm like, why? Well, because those ones don't face the customers. It's like, yeah. What do you think the first one they're going to look for? The lowly test system that is, sorry, CloudBees, the Jenkins default that's running on some system somebody bothered not to shut down. Because once you get in, they literally just Nmap, they just scan the shit out of all your ports, and it is the mistake, just one mistake. And then if you follow a kill chain, they just find their way around. And then if you're like Equifax, they're there forever. And like, they're really smart. They like test a little this. Nothing happened? Good. Go a little further. Oh, something happened. Let's go back. Let's try this way. So again, the thing about the world has changed a lot. The thing is, like, you got to now, like, protect at the most atomic level of how things get done in your system. And so one of the things I'll circle back, like, so if we think about DevOps and DevSecOps, and here's the thing, if anybody is having an issue with the word DevSecOps, go to that side of the room, because I'll be over on this side of the room trying to worry about solving the problem and not arguing about whether the name's valid or not. It is a name. It was created by Shannon Leitz. We can argue about the name, or we can go over here on this side of the building and try to fix the problems. I'm on that side. Werner Wagels, who the CTO of Amazon still in 2006, there was an interview with ACM, and he said the thing that was different about Amazon was they had this notion of you build it, you run it. So they started shifting a lot of the responsibility into the developer. And that actually became sort of a mantra, even though this was kind of pre-definition DevOps, it became the mantra for DevOps. Developers were pagers. We started kind of moving our expertise from as operations, even QA, and now you'll see security into the pipeline so the developers can own all this, right? And a lot of what we've learned from DevOps is this kind of metaphorical notion of something called the andon cord, right? So this should be reasonably relevant here, but actually was mostly attributed to Toyota. It was a rope that anybody on the line could stop the line for any reason. And if they stopped the line, the first thing the floor manager would say to them, actually this is in Mike Rother, who's a local cat here, Toyota Kata book. If they stopped the line, the first thing the floor manager would say is, thank you. So before they even knew why, they saw that as an opportunity to learn, right? Like, that's kind of a flip of how we think in most, to throw a punch to Mr. Sloan, who camped out pretty close to here somewhere. So there's this andon cord notion. And so that we see that in the kind of how we deliver software with the kind of, we throw the gates in, we break it, we not break it, we stop it, we go back, right? And over time, we get some kind of forced resilience. We break things down into small pieces. In Toyota, it was called single-piece flow. And that's kind of been, this is back in 2006 from an Agile presentation, but it's still today as valid as anything that kind of how we build our resilience into our delivery pipeline. And then Melody McKesson, who's Senior Director of Engineering at Google Platform, this was last year at 2017 Swamp Ups. That number's probably 2 or 3x. Like, these are amazing numbers about how you can do DevOps at, like, you know, ridiculous speed. But the one that always crushes me, which is 150 million automated tests per day. So one of the stories I didn't tell you is there was a Kentucky plant in Toyota that actually produced like 2,200 cars a day. And so Toyota was the kind of inventor of the end-on-cord concept, right? And you know, an automotive analyst went there and interviewed the plant manager and said, "How do you build 2,200 cars a day? That's amazing." And the curt answer was, "Easy. We pull the end-on-cord 5,000 times a day." Right? Like, that's, you know, the messaging in there is like, break it fast. Embrace failure. So kind of if you look at DevOps, right, and what we did, like, we did a really good job. We're still doing it. We kind of took the notion of over the wall from dev to ops, over the wall to QA. We kind of pipelined it. We're pretty efficient. I'd say we're all patting ourselves on the back, except, oops, we forgot about security. Right, and that's the thing. And so the messaging, you know, we joke on when we're building the DevOps handbook is it's kind of a little easy because all we have to do is, I mean, on one part, we're all a bunch of idiots for not including security early enough. The other part, all we have to do is kind of replicate all the things, most of the things we did that has been the successful model of DevOps. So we have DevSecOps. So we say something like, you build it, you secure it. So a play on Werner Wargel's thing, right? I want my developers to be able to build it and secure it. And then in some cases, maybe they don't even know how they secured it. Because what happens is security people put that meta automation, guardrail, all that stuff into the delivery flow of how they build things. We just think of this as another set of gates and abstractions on top of what we already do. And so the thing is, I get invited to a lot of places. And they say, "Hey, John, can you come in and look at our kind of way we do things or DevOps things?" And the truth is, I love doing that because usually half the time that turns into more business. So I go anywhere. Any large company has an interesting, complex problem. I'll go on my dime and I'll visit. I'll spend a day. I'll offer that to any of y'all. But imagine the case of somebody, because I want you to really see, I think we're doing a really good job. And I walk in and they're like, "Well, we use a lot of IDs and we're pretty cool. Developers have a lot of fluency with the way we do things." And you might even say, like, our ideation is pretty awesome, how we build stories, and we're using Safe or whatever. And but you know what? That version control is just a pain in the ass. And at Jenkins thing, it just sends a lot of red alerts to the developers, and they hate it. Nobody's laughing? Okay. But boy, we kick ass on behavior-driven development. We've got a Kubernetes engine that drives Selenium requests, and like, life is awesome. And be like, all right, hold on a second. I'm sorry, this is not right. Right? You're missing so many pieces. You don't have a holistic, systematic approach to the way you deliver software. This concept of shift left ain't gonna work because it's gonna fall off the cliff. So that's, you know, so what do we do? And these are just, I'm not recommending, again, I tell people these are the quickest, easiest icons I could grab for demonstration purposes. Most of them are good products, but any, you know, there's also tons of alternatives, of course. But this is what we do with security today. I ask people about very few people look at, if I talk to most of the mature DevOps environments, I would say it's very simple to identify they have a systems approach, holistic, shift left, kind of no stone unturned from in terms of everything I can. And the more I can push left, the things I find further downstream, I put to the left. And I'm constantly building that rigor, anti-fragility, if you want to call it. But in security, we're just sitting there like in a lot of variants of something like, well, we got Qualys, but we did this, but we don't. I'm like, okay, well, this is easy. Like, we just have to treat our pipeline. So even today, if we ask 10 people what the definition of DevOps is, right, we're going to get 10 different answers. We know that. But the thing is, here's what I'll always say is they're all correct. And that's kind of the beauty of DevOps, right? Like, the curse of DevOps, it has no single definition that everybody, when they first get involved in it, just like has to find, and where is it? And then at some point you realize, do we really need a one single definition? Because the beauty of DevOps is it doesn't have one single definition. Well, that will be the case if DevSecOps as a term matures. There'll be 10 definitions, there'll be 10 answers. But I'll always give you my answer, which is one primitive of DevSecOps would be you build it, you secure it. You have to basically take those kind of out-of-band, siloed, over-the-wall practices that you would security and just embed them into the flow. And in the best world, the developers get all of that for free. I'll talk about some other things that you need to do, but in general, the perfect world is developer just forwards and does what they want, and in most cases, the developer and cyber people are protecting them earlier in the flow. And they're playing the DevOps game. We call that DevSecOps. And so, like, you know, I'll probably run out of time as I usually do. But that means as much as you can do on the left. Can you do threat modeling at story building time? I mean, it always amazes me when I talk I get people in a room, a bunch of people. As I said earlier, I'm working with CIOs, so the first thing I do is I just go around and interview the hell out of every team, and I talk to all teams, not just the manager. In fact, the managers are not allowed in the meeting. And one of the things I hear over and over is the security people are not in the requirements and design meetings. And there's some legacy of why that happens. I'm like, that's fundamentally broken. You know, I mean, and you find downstream, like wrong version of TLS, about the time it's going to go to production. Oh, we didn't know. You might have known if you invited them in there. So there's a ton of things you can do on the left side. Again, I would encourage you to go find Citra Longo. Hit me up if you can't spell that name in RSA. Brilliant presentation of how she's solving this problem from a DevSecOps. You know, automating scanning, SCA, I mean, just all the things. And don't stop. We do talk about this in the in the DevOps handbook, in one of the I think it's the last chapter, which is just some kind of general guidelines, kind of a pre-DevSecOps terminology. But I think a big one, I'll actually a couple of these I'll cover in a minute. One other thing I wanted to add is, I told you that the DevSecOps handbook, Shannon Leitz is working on it. Every time I get to talk to her, I feel like I should be paying somebody $1,000. She is in a different universe when it comes to security. And I've talked to a lot of security people. And when I tell them what she's doing, they're like, either they know her and they're like, oh my God, yes, Shannon Leitz, or wow, we're nowhere near there. But one of the things that she's taken it to, and you got to crawl, walk, run to get to this, but she's done so much work on understanding the economics, of the economy of adversaries. So if you can watch some of her presentations, and she has a whole classification. I'll not go through all of them, but certainly the advanced adversaries are the ones that are really pretty scary. And so she spends a lot of time, a lot of tools, and she actually has gotten to the point now where, like, if she goes to RSA and it's kind of fun to have drinks, she'll ask everybody, what's your best metric for security? And some people play defect, vulnerability, criticals and highs per KLOC or 10,000 lines of code, or right? And they'll say, I've been getting defects decreased, and I'll show you Fannie Mae's numbers. And she says, for me, it's adversary retention rate. Right, this is hard, this is not easy to get to. There's no one product that gives, there is a couple of products that help you get on the road to get this. But imagine the idea, like that, like if you are a crook, which I'm certain nobody in this room is, there's the first house has German Shepherds and guard dogs and cameras and like, you know what, I'm not gonna do that one. Next one has a barbed wire fence, don't like getting cut, not a good climber. Third one is a screen door, no fence, no dog, no alarm, anything. You're probably gonna walk in that one, right? So what she does is, I call these macro level attributes or metrics. almost like I don't give a shit what else anything else is doing as long as this one's right, which is the things that she does to secure her environment. By the way, I'm sorry I didn't tell you. Her role is she manages a 50-person red team at Intuit. So this is a team that is dedicated, 50 people to attack their internal systems, right? And she's the things that she does to prove that, like hypothesis-driven, that it reduces adversary retention rate. They're coming, they look around, they're like, nothing to see here, going on to I'm going to find the house with the screen door, no dogs, no. This was kind of the Fannie Mae. I left it in the presentation. This isn't Citra's presentation at RSA, the DevSecOps RSA presentation. Again, ping me on Botchgaloop, and I'll get you the link to the video. Some of the things they did, basically average. So here's the thing, where are you starting? What are you trying to do? So you can go over there and for a year argue about DevSecOps as a term, or you can go over here and start working some things. You may or may not get to Shannon Leach land, but you might start tracking, how long does it take to close vulnerabilities, what's your increase, track how many people in your organization are actually kind of applying these type of techniques. What is your, what are you reporting, or you're just in general organizational download vulnerability scoring, and are you decreasing it, right? So, and then there's another guy, DJ Schleen at Aetna. He's pretty cool. He's like been deep into containers and Kubernetes, and he's another one of those maniacs in the most awesome sense. So every time I get to see him, he's like, John, let me tell you what I'm doing this year. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And so you can go look him up, see what he's done in the last couple of years with Kubernetes and containers and security. But like this year is pretty awesome. He basically has now got most of his workloads, not all workloads at Apple, but most of the workloads he deals with our production, containerized, okay, and they're immutable, right? And so what he can do now is he basically kind of calls it moving target defense, right? So in some applications, they just roll containers. They're clusters, like they're in the general sense at the cluster level, they're not state dependent, so they just constantly, they only live for a certain amount of time. So even if you get to one which is read-only and immutable, which is really hard to do anyway, like it's probably going to go away, unlike Equifax where you could live there for 4 months. But even better than that, he has on his kind of inbound IDSs, things that look fishy, he can then fire off to his Kubernetes servers, and depending on the threat probability, he might just blow away the whole cluster and re-roll it, right? Or, this is like because he can, he might just take the whole thing from source and redistribute it. Right? Because why? Anybody? Come on, I know you're probably all drunk from last night. Because he can. Anyway, it's a really cool. And oh, by the way, he's also working on like security chaos monkey too, right? Like so, some cool things there. So kind of, I get 2 more things to cover. I do want to kind of summarize like what I think are the important points about this DevSecOps thing, which is one, I guess I didn't put it, don't like fret over the name, don't waste your time. Find the places. But guess what? I asked, all of a sudden we're running some of these DevSecOps days, and lots of security people are showing up. And historically, security people haven't been showing up for DevOps days. And I asked them, and they're like, well, DevOps days, I didn't know if it made sense for me. I got a lot of conferences. When they hear DevSecOps days, they show up. They know DevOps is important. They heard the word security. They're coming to the party. So again, no friend or name. But here's the thing. When it comes to scanning, an incredibly bad blind spot is this idea that you've got some really expensive scanning tool and checkbox for OK. The high-performing organizations have used a lot of scanning tools. And so you have to, the problem you're going to make sure that you do not run into is a bad signal-noise ratio on scans. And that's one of the things I ask people, do you have any sense? And some people just say it's 3% signal. Like, what do you think that's doing to the developers? That could have been my hypothesis for the Equifax problem. I mean, if you get a gazillion alerts about security, what does that sound like? It sounds like they think they're the most important people in the world. They think I don't have any extra time to deal with all these things. Right? So you really have to be good. And that's no different when you're going to use monitoring and alerting, right? Like, you have to get, if you want people to react to these alerts, you have to fine-tune the signal-noise ratio so that the signals are actionable and they're real and they have to be dealt with. I mean, in Shannon Leitz's case, a lot of times they let him go right through the production and the red team hits it as soon as it gets in there. And then they simulate the breach. And that email goes to everybody. Oh, by the way, we just hacked 1.5 million records. We'd really like if you did some remediation here within the next 10 minutes because this was a simulation. And by the way, if you don't do it within a certain period of time, we're recalling it anyway. You want to change behavior? Explain vulnerabilities in business terms. I think a lot of people will take these vulnerabilities and then send them to some security OWASP site or this and what I think you have to do, and I know you have to do, is you got to contextualize these things. By the way, this vulnerability, kind of like what Shannon does, I mean, you don't have to go to simulation of the breach in production, but tell them what this really means. I mean, if you're really cool, you actually calculate the cost based on the IBM report data. This would cost us, here's why I want you to pay attention to this email message or this alert. By our calculation, this would cost about $100 million. Would you mind fixing it? You have to DevOps so first off, don't treat security items as completely different systems, different naming, nomenclature. A bug is a bug is a bug. So, if you're using Jira, they all go into Jira. They should show up in your stand-up. They should be arbitrated in terms of where they go in the flow, right? So try to make it as natural so that, A, you contextualize the importance, B, you don't make it seem like this is some other place I got to go or other queue I have to look at. Just naturalize it as if it's any old bug, because it really is any old bug. In some cases, it's a really bad bug. I mean, some other things were obvious. I don't understand organizations that don't open up their code bases to everybody in the company. I mean, I do understand there are scenarios where that may make sense. But when you do open up your code base, you invite everybody to find. You can have your own bug bounties. I mean, it just, and then, can be really good on educating how to fix. All right, so I promised the divine. I said this is called the divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity. Of course, DevOps is all about culture. So I got a story to tell you. And I'll give you the short version. There's a quote from a guy named Bill Bryson. It's that you can. It's an observation of, at the same time, two sailors were actually killing the last two dodo birds on the planet for fun, and the dodo bird's like, shoot me. No, shoot me, right? Basically, Principia was basically being inked and done, right? The laws of nature, everything, right? And so he says that you'd be hard-pressed, I would submit, to find a better pairing of occurrence to illustrate the divine and felonious nature of a human being. And so I was at a Cyber Chicago conference last year, and the morning keynote, I was the late keynote, and he was the morning keynote, was a hacker. And he was basically telling anonymously, he was in some room, hidden, face covered, hoodie. And at some point he said that the last 5 breaches, 4 banks, 1 hospital, the way he got in was tailgating. Somebody held the door open. And he had some really awesome stories of how complex and how intelligent socially engineering strategies, and I'm sure he wasn't even telling us the best ones. So he got in. And then in some sense it felt like he was laughing at us. Like how stupid we are for doing this. And then I thought, well, you know what? This young kid has never worked in a company where you've been there for 15 or 20 years, and every time you try to let the door close, the person who's in a cube like about 400 yards down, they come up and scream at you like, why didn't you hold the door, God damn it? You just kind of get in this like, I'm just going to hold the door. I'm just tired of it's Monday morning. I'm tired of getting yelled at. I'm just going to hold the door open. I mean, I was just in Columbus a few weeks ago, and I told the story. I worked at J.P. Morgan Chase, and it's this monster building, and the consultants have the lowest of anything, so we park in the farthest right-hand corner. And I would tell you what all consultants do to get in that building is they tailgate, right? Because I ain't walking all the way around in front of the building and when it's cold and ice. So that happens, and he's laughing. And I thought about like that quote from Bryson about divine and felonious nature and how he didn't really understand why that happens. I mean, the fact that it happens is the reality. And so I added this kind of notion to my presentation of this kind of imagine, you know, we always say DevOps is culture, right? And in some cases we're pretty good, a lot of cases we're full of shit, right? So imagine if I tell you that like security is really important, and I tell you that this hacker tells us that like the way he breaches you is he waits for somebody to hold the door. I didn't tell you he finds an empty floor with an open cube, sticks a Raspberry Pi in there, opens out his little toolbox, finds some port. Sorry, Cloud Bees, he finds a default Jenkins, which, by the way, that was the NSA breach. And then he's got you, he leaves the building, right? He owns you. So imagine that it's raining, it's cold. Susie, I'm really going all out on this example. She's pregnant, she has 6 boxes. And she's like 3 paces behind you. And you let the door close and let her badge in. And then when she badges in, you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna so get yelled at, this is gonna be so horrible. But I had to do it because, you know, like this is what we have to do as an organization. And she comes up to you and says, I wanna thank you for making us a safer, more resilient, very much like the Toyota. Like, maybe it's that simple for winning. All right, hey, thank you all.
We have a few minutes for questions.
In many cases, issues around security were more reactive than proactive. And I think a lot of the larger corporations, they're very reactive. So when you go into a larger company, how do you go about, who needs to be on board to make that change? Because that's a big change in thinking. Because most teams, they're developing at breakneck speed. Security's not thought as a part of that as much.
The things that you hear most often, people come up to me, and a variation of that is, John, I love this idea, but we can't slow the developers down. I'm like, okay, but like, I mean, that was really kind of DevOps 2010, right? Like, it seemed like what we were trying to do was going to slow everybody down. And we know, we know, right now, we're pretty confident we know a couple of things in DevOps in general. That there are certain behavior patterns that if we do them, we can be faster and more resilient. Lead time, cycle time, the door report. We know this from experience, from academic, rigorously statistical accurate data, right, like across the board, that this is a truism. So the truth is you have to figure out how to purvey that same, we know this is correct, we'll gather more data, but it is back to the behavior patterns. And then it's hard, right? Like, because you have some fractures that are way deeper than any of the other silos. And there is this, like, try to tell me. So in the early days of DevOps, I was working with Chef, right? And I remember going to some of these kind of Lisa early conferences. You know, my memory is getting chased with sticks and rocks out of the building to introduce some system that would actually allow them to not manually do things and automate them. And all these things about, well, what if it goes haywire? What if it, you know, we've got better about that, right? We get it. So there is that kind of, you have to deal with these systemic breaks in the way people think. But, the guys who told me that they didn't believe the organization would let them come to design and requirements, I said, we use hypothesis-driven. We learned everything we know from, if you read Mike Rother's Toyota Kata, which it's one of my favorite all-time books, Improvement Kata. It's based on Deming's PDCA. It allows us to create hypothesis, and all we have to do is follow through on a check and the act. So that I tell them, like, here's the deal. You capture the data. You make the hypothesis that you showing up at the requirements in design will improve security based on these metrics. You show up, and then you show the data. So, I mean, you have to just throw science in people's face. And so it has to just be this chipping away. I'm in a client right now that is so manifested in cabs and unplanned work. I mean, if you read Dominica DeGrandis' book about making work visible and the 5 thieves, right? They think they're secure. The auditor, I mean, I can go on for hours about this, but the auditors have a notion. But then there's also this, we don't tell the auditors what they don't know. Don't want them to know about that. And at every given time, 50% of all the work going in this like $10 billion corporation is unmanaged, unknown, and whatever. But they have a cab, and they have an architectural review board, and sometimes it can take 2 weeks to get a simple change in the system. For this notion that, like, I mean, sometimes it gets easier to just break those things down to say, and by the way, how good are we really anyway? And usually the answer is not that good, right? So no simple answer. But I guess giving you a really long answer and probably not allowing another question, but the simple answer is learn what we learn from DevOps, very hypothesis-driven, go for the data, prove your point, or not prove your point. You might be wrong. You might say, I want to do all this stuff, here's my hypothesis, here's what I think it is, and like, hey, I was wrong. Maybe this isn't right for us. Thanks for that question, it was a good one.
All right, we should keep going.
Oh, sure, man.
Round of applause for John. Holy smokes.